personally told me that they'd gotten very close to discovering who was really behind the secrecy for the UFO issue, but they hit a lead wall. And he looked at me in the eyes, he said, "Dr. Greer, you're dealing with the varsity team of all black projects. Good luck." So it's a very, very complex issue, and the secrecy isn't that hard to maintain if you have this sort of infiltration into major institutions, media, and also the ability simply to float nonsensical stories out there. Because people hear the word UFO and extraterrestrial, they think somebody from a trailer park in West Virginia who's floated on board a spacecraft had sex with someone from Mars and claims they have a baby in an incubator. Or, just all kinds of nonsense. The truth of it is actually more interesting. The truth of the technologies and the fact that the extraterrestrial technologies are so advanced that they interface directly with coherent thought. Like we have coherent light in a laser, they have technologies that interface with thought, that interface with conscious mind, that their development of artificial intelligence that's integrated into these spacecraft is so advanced that they pick up on a directed... it's fascinating. And this is what we've been experimenting with. And the whole paradigm becomes a new paradigm of understanding the structure of the cosmos. But the most of the information that's out in the public on this issue has been a carnival of silliness. And that keeps most serious people sort of in the closet on it. In fact, it's interesting, I often work with senior government officials in Europe and in Canada and elsewhere, and they go, "Oh, we're very interested, I want everything you have on this, but no one can know that I'm interested because it'll ruin my career, because I'll be ridiculed." So it's a very interesting psychological matrix that's been created to keep people in the box. And what we're trying to do is do something serious, push the envelope on this information, and credible, and get people to understand what the truth is. It's a very common question of why don't these visitors make themselves more obvious. And what I point out to people is they have. They have been filmed hovering over Rome for an hour. They have been filmed over downtown Montreal. I have the video. They have been seen all over Mexico City and on radar. They have been filmed over the White House and the Capitol and the photograph of the 1950s. They have landed and met with officials who then betrayed that. They have done everything but forcibly say this. Now, important, what good would come from one civilization forcing on another civilization their presence? This is our problem, not theirs. We've lied to each other. We've kept this secret. We have the proof. We have the materiel, the spacecraft. We have the full documentation. We have radar tapes. And what the Disclosure Project is doing that. But it's not their place, these visitors from other planets, to force their presence on us. Because to the extent that we are lying to each other in this dysfunctional human family, what that says to them is that we're not ready for that level of open contact. And so this is something that I think is a very key thing, is that if you go to a civilization that's less developed and overtly and forcibly impose your presence, it never works. This is the mistake that is happening now in Iraq, where we're going into a country and thinking we're going to impose a Jeffersonian democracy to a people who have never had anything but dictatorships and what have you. It isn't practical. And so what they're looking for, in my opinion, is that they have given us enough evidence to educate the world that we're not alone. Why are we covering this up? Why are humans? Why are governments? Why are corporations? Why don't we tell the truth? And I think that to the extent we do, we will see that they're ready to be more open. Now, the other point is that what agency on earth is assigned the task of interfacing with them? They're not interested in just the Norwegians or the Americans or the French or the Chinese. They're interested because they are global civilizations. They are interested in human Earth civilization. But the United Nations has no mandate to deal with this. We've tried. They refuse. They're too afraid. And they've been threatened. I know for a fact that they were threatened not to when we asked them. So CSETI, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, is a citizens diplomacy effort. And we have people going out all over the world. I mean, in Australia, South America, Europe, United States, where we have teams using certain protocols attempting to make contact peacefully. And of course, we have not the funding of a government, we don't have the equipment and what have you, but it's a prototype, experimental diplomatic effort. And we have had amazing results. And the reason we have is that they want that kind of contact, but they want it when people are ready for it. And the sign that we're ready for it is when we ask for it. So it's really more the secrecy and the fact that these visitors from other civilizations and other parts of the universe are not forcibly exposing themselves to us is an act of compassion on their part. Obviously, if they wanted to, they could. They have chosen not to because their measurement of how ready we are is how we react. And we have failed that test so far. And I think that this is something that takes a lot of introspection and courage from our leaders. This is why when I meet with people in the government, I say, look, they are waiting for an appropriate response from the earth. An appropriate. We've fired at them. We've tried to get their technologies to reverse engineer them so we can have them secretively. We have denied them. We've ridiculed the issue. We've lied to each other. We've covered it up. We've done everything but do something appropriate, peaceful, reaching out to them, and be open and honest about it. So that is the next step. And some government in the world, I don't care what government, Norway, needs to lead that, be the leading edge of that. And until then, our group is trying to do this with our humble resources. I mean, obviously, we don't have the resources of a government. I think that part of it is that there has been so much virulent disinformation put out into the public. And you have to understand, you say these investigators and researchers, most of them are housewives or businessmen. They have an interest as a hobby. And they're not going to be able to distinguish between a false case and disinformation that's put out by counterintelligence from a shadowy military operation or corporate operation and the real thing. How are they going to distinguish? And so there's a lot of confusing information, and it's very difficult. I tell people it takes years to get, it's like peeling away layers of an onion. And you've peeled away 38 layers and you still have 20 more to go. Because it is an enigma wrapped in a mystery, wrapped in a total black hole of deception. Most of the information put out there to the public and to these investigators is deliberate disinformation designed to evoke a response. Fear and ridicule. One of those two. And this is why you see so many things about, alien invasion week on the networks, and they're invading us, or they're abducting us, or they're torturing us, or there's nothing of the kind happening. But there's plenty of ways to put that information out there and convince certain people there are. And humans have this predilection to liking to be afraid. It's like people like to go to horror movies, and people like to be frightened. But more importantly, people who want to control a large number of people or keep something secret, you do it through fear. And it isn't hard to do. I mean, I have documents from private institutes who talk about the use of stagecraft, I'm quoting, so that they are artificially staging certain UFO events and abduction events for their psychological warfare value. And I encouraged a man in England to write a book called MILAB, Military Abductions, where it talks about this. And the value of it is that it puts out a certain patina of fear that can manipulate large numbers of people. Because one of the long-term agendas for this secrecy, which Werner von Braun, who was the Nazi German, I should say, perhaps, he'd said he really wasn't a Nazi, but he worked with Hitler's and developed a V-2 rocket. He was brought into the U.S. space research program back after World War II, and his spokeswoman for the last 4 years of his life is on our team. And she said, oh yes, he knew about this, and he said to her that there's an enormous amount of disinformation on this subject because their agenda long-term, this huge $1 trillion a year military industrial project, is to grow that industry so that the whole world becomes united against a threat from outer space. There is no threat from outer space, but if you can convince people there is, instead of spending $1 trillion a year out of the global economy, we'll spend $2 or $3 or $5 trillion a year. And that's the agenda behind the secrecy. But in order to do that, people have to have an enemy, and you have to manufacture fear. And so the average person who investigates this issue has not had access to Werner von Braun's spokespeople or to the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which we have. And they are completely vulnerable to a lot of false information. And I say this, and I say this with some compassion, at least 90% of all information out there on this subject is some form of deliberately implanted false information designed for a certain agenda. And so I tell people they need to be very skeptical, and it takes a great deal of research to find out, to get to the bottom of it. Well, the Disclosure Project is an ongoing initiative, as is the CSETI project to make contact, which we call the CE5 initiative, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. And the Disclosure Project is moving forward with a number of governments around the world, as well as the United States government, to identify people who want to see this done. And we've recently had conversations with some of the new chairmen of committees at the Congress. We're working very closely with the Honorable Paul Hellyer in Canada, who used to be the Minister of Defense for Canada. We're working very closely with a very powerful European country to effect disclosure, and they are cooperating. I can't say who this country is, which country it is, but it's a very significant development. So we're continuing to put the information out, but also work and coordinate with various governments around the world to make that happen. And we've actually, in the last 6 months, have had some very positive breakthroughs. In addition to that, we had continued to put these contact teams together, which has gotten the attention of a couple of different governments around the world who are supporting contact peacefully and are wanting to work with us for peaceful contact. So this is a very positive development, and we hope that bears fruit in the next few months to year or so. So that's really where we're going with that, and we continue to train people to do this, because I believe that Rupert Sheldrake, you may have heard of, has an interesting theory about morphogenic fields, and how when a certain number of people start to do something, it picks up a sort of power non-locally that influences. And I think that the more there are people who understand the subject and move in the direction of positive contact and a positive outcome for the future of Earth, that reality will be manifested. That reality will appear. And so I think it's very important for people not to sit around waiting for Norway government or United States government to act. We are people who are conscious. We can act. And the mind, the human mind, is very powerful. And a group of people working together who are conscious with the right intention can make amazing things happen. And that's what we're encouraging people to do. The spiritual implications of this are profound. Now, I distinguish that from religious, organized religions. But I think that what's very important, what's key to our perspective on this, is that Erwin Schrödinger, who was the father of quantum mechanics and particle wave theory, stated 100 years ago or so that the total number of minds in the universe is one. And in fact, the consciousness is a singularity, phasing within all beings.